Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be covering the basic body movements for rigging a vtuber model in Live 2D. This is free trial version of Live 2D Safe, so you'll be able to do everything we do today in the free version. However, because of the limit of the 30 movement parameters permitted by the free trial version of Live 2D, you are not going to be able to get a lot of physics in, so I did want to give you guys a heads up. We're not going to be able to do the augmented body physics, but if you do want to learn that, that will be covered in the complex body movement, which will be the next tutorial going out. But besides that, let's get right on into it. When starting off a new model in Live 2D, I like to separate the parts into its associated limbs. So example, the head, the torso, the legs right and left, and the arms right and left. This will make it so that when I have to work on stuff, I'm able to compartmentalize which part I'm working on, and it makes the task of animating and rigging the body a lot less daunting. Certain groups are placed inside of other groups, like the head and the arm components are placed inside the body Y rotation deformer that is used to move the body up and down. This is done just so we are able to do like motions up and down, and I do actually use that parameter in particular to give a slight up and down motion when you breathe, but we'll cover that later. Alright, so now that we have that all sorted out, let's start with the torso. To do this, we're going to enter the Art Mesh Edit mode, which is located up at the top next to your Texture Atlas. So we're going to click that and we're going to head on in. And the first tool we're going to use to trace the entirety of the outside is the Stroke Mesh Mapping tool, as you can see here. The Stroke Mesh Mapping tool is a very useful tool, as it is a tool that you can just draw points along and you can adjust the width of the mesh, how many verts will appear, how wide that line will be, and how many rows will appear. So I'm going to take this tool and I'm going to trace around the collar muscles, along the side of the body, and down towards the crotch area. Once I have that all sorted out, it's time to start doing all the tedious work and heading into drawing each of the muscles and the abs. Because for this simple rigging tutorial, I have all of the art in one flat layer for the torso. This is what we can use to establish good depth of field for these components by making sure that our art mesh clearly follows the line work of the shading. So I'm going to do 1/2 and then we're going to move on. So once I have the 1/2 done, I'm going to select all of the verts on the one side and I'm going to press Ctrl C and Ctrl V, and now I have duplicated all of those meshes. I'm going to now right click the screen and I'm going to go down to flip horizontally, and we are going to flip the mesh and then put it into its position on that side, and then it's pretty much just making sure everything's connected and tidying up. So now that we have all of our verts merged together, it's just going through the mesh and cleaning things up and making sure all of the mesh is closed so that there is no open holes. If we have open holes, it will let you know when you try to exit. It will say incorrect mesh found. You just have to make sure you go around and get everything right. And of course, we're going to go around and make sure that we have all of the shadows or clear component lines sorted out and meshed so we can get some nice lines. Until that, enjoy the speed meshing and we'll move on to the next parts. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the chest. It's a very similar process when it comes to making the art mesh for the chest. We're going to take the stroke mesh tool and we are going to trace around the outside, and we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to put a point in the direct middle of the chest, and then we are going to trace along where we have the shading on the bottom, but as you can see, it's mostly centralized. I'm selecting the Add Points tool located up at the top, as you can see. So we're using the Add Point Mesh tool to just trace around that middle dot, and it will give us like that depth, and we can adjust from there where we want to go. Like I said, the chest is very similar, and we're just going to keep chugging along and doing all of the same to all of the parts. To create a glue, we're going to select the two parts of the model that we want to glue. In this example, I'm going to use the thigh and the calf. Then I go into the Edit Art tool up at the top that we've been using so far, and I will select all the verts that we're going to have overlapping, for example, all the knee components here, and we're going to press Ctrl G. G allows you to glue everything together, and as you can see, you'll know it works when red dots appear around all of those verts that are now glued together. We're then going to move into testing the glue. I have a classic rotation deformer on here, so I'm just adjusting it and making sure that the glue works right. So gluing, as I said, refers to weights. Green refers to the current one you're working on, and red is the other one. It's a lot of trial and error, but once you get it going, you'll be able to get a nice smooth look. Alright, so now we're going to start making the actual components move. We're going to start with the Y movement for the legs, as we just were working on the legs. Everything's glued together, so we're going to put all of our components for the legs, the thigh, calf, and foot, all into a warp deformer that we're going to call leg Y. Inside that warp deformer, we're going to use, before we place it in any parameter, we're going to press Control, and we're going to make sure that our points for the knees are aligned up there so that we have a point to work with. And now it is just moving the hip up and the knee down in accordance with what we are looking for with the movement of the body. Since this is a more masculine body type, I'm going to be making the knee point outwards, but I'm first going to be going over how I like on the feminine to make like the knees come together cutely. So you'll just get to watch that as I work through it. All right, so now that we have our legs done, we're gonna start on the torso. The first thing I'm gonna do is the body Z, as this is the most farthest out that we're gonna go. So we'll make a warp deformer with all of our components, our collarbone, our chest pieces, our torso itself. And then we're going to grab along the hip area, and we're going to turn the hips up a little bit on either side. We're gonna do just one side, and then we're gonna use the reflect motion. So we're gonna grab the one side, we're gonna tilt it up, we're gonna grab the shoulder area, and we're going to tilt that in the opposite direction. So if our right hip is coming up, our right shoulder is facing down. And then we are going to go up to the 3 tabs along the top of the parameter board, and we're going to scroll down and press reflect motion. And that will have our hips done. Once we have our hips done, we are going to specifically just grab the torso component, and we're going to add that into a warp deformer called body X. We're then going to start working on the X movements, which allows our body to turn side to side. For this, I'm going to do one side, and then we will be doing the reflect motion that I was talking about earlier. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our body X warp deformer, and we want to make sure that our body is turned towards the direction that we want. So the side that is turned to the direction, so for example, we're turning to the right. We are then going to select the right side of the warp deformer, and we're going to squish it closer to the center. Then we are going to grab the left side of the warp deformer, and we're going to stretch it out slightly. And then from there, we're going to be taking our brush tool, and we're going to be adjusting how everything lines up and how our body shape looks. Now let's grab those abs and start making them look 3D. To select the torso part itself, and we're going to add in that torso component with all of its art meshes into the body X parameter. And yes, you heard me, we are going to manipulate the mesh itself. So we're going to grab the ab components, and we're going to start sliding them into position on either side. It is important to mention that when you manipulate the mesh itself, the reflect motion tool does not always work in accordance with how you want it to. So I personally like to do all of this by hand, but you can use the reflect motion tool. It will get you a bit of the way there. You'll just have to go in and do some corrections. Once you have placed the belly button, etc. into the position that you want on both sides, we're going to do the depth to those abs and muscle components that we were talking about earlier. So at 0, we're going to make sure that we select the inner circle or the inner parts of each ab. And you can do this by holding shift and using the lasso tool and selecting each part entirely. And then we are going to go back over to this left or the right, and we're going to grab the center of all of those verts, and we're going to slide them closer to the side that we are turning, and you will magically have a bit more depth. Of course, you can go in and do a little bit more work here and there, adjusting things more, lining up the verts more of how you'd like to get more accurate, but this covers around the basics of it. So I'm going to let you guys watch, and we'll get back when we get to collarbone. Now we're going to start with the breathing. For the breathing, we're going to want to make sure that we make a warp deformer inside the body Z warp deformer. So we'll grab the torso X warp deformer and we will make a deformer in between torso Z and torso X called breath. From there, we'll make sure we have all of our components for our inner torso parts selected, and then we will work on making the breathing in and out. We'll do this by at 0 making it not move, and at 1 doing the slight in and out motion. To do the second part of the breath, we are going to make a component outside of all of it called breath bob, and we're going to just make it move up and down slightly. Now we're going to rig the chest and the X and Y parameters. We're going to do this by selecting both chest components, adding them into a warp deformer similar to like we would with the body, and adjusting everything into position using the warp deformer. We're not going to actually adjust the mesh on the chest at all. We're just going to be using the warp deformer to do it, as the warp deformer is able to do the majority of it, and there's not a ton of super high detailed components on the chest that we need to do. So as you can see, I'm adjusting the chest into its components on the right side, moving it into its place, and then I'm going to grab the whole left side of the chest and move it over slightly, and then I'll start adjusting things like the shape of the chest in accordance with the position of the body, and then I will reflect it onto the opposite side and do all of the adjustments from there. We will then just repeat the same motions in the y-axis, and then we will go into the corners or the components where you're looking up to the left or up to the right, or down to left or down to the right, and we're just going to make sure that we have everything looking right at every angle. For the collarbone, we are once again repeating these same motions. We're putting the collarbone component in its own warp deformer. We're adjusting it to the left and the right according to what we would like, and then we're repeating in the y-axis again. Finally, we have the arm Y parameters. Since we can't do arm physics, what instead we're going to do is we're going to make it so when we move up and down, the arm shoulder moves in and out slightly, and the forearms move in and out slightly along with breathing. So we're going to add a rotation deformer that includes all components of the arm, the bicep, the forearm, and the hand components, and we're just going to add those into the Y, and we're going to move them up and down. Then at the elbow, where the forearm and the hand component inside, we're going to add another rotation deformer, and then we are going to add that rotation deformer to the breath parameter, and we're going to make them just move in and out slightly. So once we have all of that sorted out with the breathing and the motion up and down, we're going to select the rotation deformer of the shoulder or the whole arm itself, and we're going to make a warp deformer of it. We're then going to place that in the body X, so when we turn to the left, the arm should be hidden a little more behind the torso, so we're going to slide it back behind the torso, and we're going to grab the opposite arm and make it more visible. Once we have that done, we're going to select both of the arms' most outer components, so the warp deformers we just made that were the X, and we're going to make a warp deformer called body Z, and we're going to make it so when our hips go up, the shoulders of our arms align with the body proportions itself. And then once we have finished all of that, we just have some slight adjustments to do with head positioning and the body positioning, so we'll just go in and do all those adjustments from there. And that should cover everything we have to do around basic body rigging. Of course, sadly, I wasn't able to get into a lot of the physics components for body rigging because of our limitations, but all of that will be covered in the complex body rigging type, which will go over augmented physics, booba physics, arm physics. Don't worry, there's a lot of physics to cover. In the meantime, if you guys want to keep learning while you wait for the complex body type to come out, check out Mannequin-Kun, and you guys can get your head all ready and rigged for when we move into the complex body rigging type. Or you can leave a specific tutorial you would like to see in the future down in the comments below, and I will keep those in mind. Until next time, bye!